This is Sidney Street. Located in East London, it would play host to one of the most insane confrontations the city had ever witnessed. On January 3rd, 1911, two anarchist gunmen, equipped with automatic weapons, would occupy the attention of the entire country and more than 500 police officers and military personnel in a firefight that lasted over 6 hours. But what were the events that led to this wild standoff? And how did it end? To find out, we need to wind back the clock to December of 1910 and turn our attention just west of Sidney Street to Houndsditch, where a mysterious noise is echoing through the night. At 9:15 p.m. on Friday the 16th of December 1910, a noise begins emanating from somewhere along Houndsditch Street. It's cold and eerily quiet. The sound is distinct against the nothingness. At around 10 p.m, Max Vile of number 120 Houndsditch returns home from visiting a friend, at which point he becomes aware of the sound. It's coming from the back of the jewelry store next to his house. After listening for some time and deciding that it resembled the sound of drilling, sawing, and the breaking away of brick, he ventured out onto the street, peered into the shop window of number 119, and checked the door was locked. Having verified it was, he went to fetch a police officer to investigate the sound. Maybe it was just some maintenance work being done. What Mr. Vile didn't know at the time was that just meters away from his property, a gang of criminals was in the process of conducting a break-in. Equipped with drills, chisels, hammers, and a blowtorch, they were tunneling towards the safe that sat at the back of the Harris jewelry store. At 10:45, Vile returned with an officer by the name of Walter Piper. They both went to the back of his home and listened to the noise. Suspecting foul play was afoot, Piper went to the adjacent Exchange Building Street, approached the only building close to the sound with a light on, knocked on the door, and was met by a man who, according to him, opened the door in a suspicious manner. 2 buildings down, at number 9, the gang is obliviously chipping away at the brickwork, unaware that one of their accomplices is being grilled by the authorities. At 11:02, after a brief interaction and sufficiently convinced something was wrong, Piper left to get back up, leaving 2 nearby officers, Police Constables Walter Choate and Ernest Woodhams, to keep watch over the 2 streets. Immediately afterwards, the man behind the door scrambled to the back of number 11 and began climbing over the intervening walls all the way to number 9, where he informed the gang of the police interaction. Thinking it was nothing, they continued their work. However, unbeknownst to them, a storm was brewing. At around 11:05, Piper returned to the scene with 2 more officers, Sergeant Robert Bentley and Constable Frederick Smoothie. The former made his way to number 120 Houndsditch, where he leant out of Max Vile's second-floor backroom window to see what was causing the noise. But he was unable to make anything out through the darkness. Whilst there, he struck up a conversation with Vile, and a loud one at that. The gang, hearing Sergeant Bentley bellowing above them, stopped their chiseling and listened. Something was wrong. Over the next 30 minutes, that would become self-evident. Through the blinds of the darkened front room of number 9, the gang would witness 7 police officers equipped with wooden batons gather outside their base of operations. 2 more were positioned as lookouts on the adjacent Cutler and Houndsditch streets. Suddenly, at 11:30, they hear a knock on the door at number 11. Sergeant Bentley is standing there, waiting. As before, someone opened the door furtively, keeping it only slightly ajar. Bentley asked,
"Have you been working or knocking about inside?"
The man did not answer.
"Don't you understand English? Have you got anybody in the house that can? Fetch him down,"
he continued. In response, the man closed the door even further, so that it was open only an inch. Losing his patience, Bentley pushed the door open and entered the foyer in confrontation. In response, the man stumbled backwards before slowly backing up the stairs of the house. Moments later, the back door flies open, revealing a pistol leveled squarely at the sergeant. In less than a second, 2 shots had been fired, the first coming from the rear of the building and the second from up the stairs. The sergeant lurched forward, stumbling almost in defiance of the bullets before collapsing backwards and coming to rest in the doorway. Another sergeant, Bryant, was next to be shot, being struck in the chest and left arm. Wounded but alive, he staggered briefly before slumping against the wall of the adjacent building. Constable Woodhams, too, was struck and fell into the street. Amidst the chaos, Constable James Martin became pinned to the left of the door, witnessing only occasional flashes and the barrel of a handgun being pointed out of the doorway. When the arm that held it turned in his direction, he ran, tripping over in the process but making it safely into a house across the street. Sergeant Tucker and Constable Strongman then witnessed one of the gunmen emerge from the house, turning towards them and firing off several shots, one of which struck Tucker in the heart. Strongman caught him and hauled him around the corner onto the adjoining Cutler Street. A bystander came over trying to help and asked him,
"Are you shot?"
To which he replied,
"Yes."
That was his last word. Walter Choate, who had been near the door when the shooting began, remained in position until one of the assailants tried to make a run for it, at which point he tried to tackle him. In the ensuing grapple, Choate was shot in the leg and foot repeatedly as he tried to wrestle the gunman's weapon away. Seeing that one of their comrades was having trouble, the other assailants let loose several bullets, aiming for Choate. 3 of these bullets struck him in the torso, but another hit the man Choate was entwined with, injuring him severely. 3 men and 1 woman then helped the wounded gunman up and started off down Cutler Street, vanishing into the night. It was reported that the entire shooting had taken just 10 seconds. In that time, 3 police officers had been killed and a further 2 wounded. It was one of the deadliest shootings the country had seen in decades, sending the media into a speculative frenzy. Who were the culprits? What gang could have initiated this brazen heist? Maybe the exchange buildings harbour an answer. Before we find out though, this video is sponsored by War Thunder, the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made. If you're new to the game, let me introduce you. Download and launch War Thunder for free, go to the Italian tech tree and pick this little guy, the one that looks like a deformed mosquito, and join a game. Spend the next 15 minutes clumsily rolling around in one of Italy's most awkward World War II vehicles, failing to penetrate anything that is French, and generally getting in the way of people. If being a nuisance isn't your speed though, you can always try one of the other, better 2,500 planes, tanks and ships that are in the game. But you know we're just here to watch 10 different X-ray views of shells failing to penetrate a French B-2 bis as it slowly and ominously rolls towards you. To experience this nirvana, click on my link in the description or pinned comment below to get a massive bonus pack that includes 7 days of premium, 100,000 silver lions, and an exclusive vehicle emblem, available to new players on PC and console and those that haven't played in at least 6 months. Anyway, that was all. Let's get back to the mystery. Detective reports from the subsequent investigation describe number 11 on Exchange Building Street as an unremarkable 3-story home. The front room contained a chest of drawers, a table with biscuits on it, a couch, fireplace, and 4 upholstered chairs. Remember these chairs because they'll be important later. Littered all over the ground floor of the house and the neighbouring street were spent bullet cartridges belonging to 3 different pistols: a Mauser C96, a Belgian FN Model 1910 Browning, and a Dreiser M1907. A sweep of the rest of the building and the adjacent number 10 produced little of note, so investigators turned their attention to number 9. In the property, they found a gas pipe connected to rubber tubing extending all the way to the backyard. There, stored in a toilet closet, was an array of carpentry and brickwork equipment, ranging from diamond-tipped drills to chisels. Alongside these items were a number of discarded bricks, an oxygen canister, and a blowtorch. Next to the closet was a sizable hole in the brickwork of the jewelry store's back wall, the fruit of the gang's criminal labor. It appeared that, once through, the oxygen canister and gas supply would ignite and fuel the blowtorch, which would be used to break into the safe found at the back of the jewelry store. Aside from this, and to the annoyance of investigators, the criminals had left very little in the way of identifiable belongings. No photos, ID documents, nothing. The only morsels of evidence to be found were 2 bottles plastered with fingerprints, stored in one of number 11's cupboards. These were promptly sent to the fingerprint department at Scotland Yard, London's police headquarters, but securing a suspect using these markings was a long shot. Scotland Yard's fingerprint database was restricted only to those people who had been previously arrested, and thus their cache of culprits was limited. Still though, clues have a magical way of connecting later down the line, so keep this in mind. In an effort to glean some information as to the criminals' identities, detectives reached out to the owners of number 9 and number 11 and interviewed the man that had leased these properties out, Harry Benning. Benning reported that on the 21st of November 1910, a man going by the name of Joe Levi came to his company, Millard Brothers Limited, and agreed to pay 10 shillings a week for number 11. He made a request for gas to be supplied to the property. A little over 2 weeks later, a different man under the name of Goldstein appeared at his offices and asked to rent out number 9. He paid the deposit and agreed to a rent of 12 shillings a week and took possession of the property on the 12th of December. Benning's statement told officers very little. The people that had rented the buildings had provided him with false names and paid in cash, leaving the trail very cold indeed. It'd now take a miracle to find the gang. At 1 p.m. the day after the shooting, police received a phone call from the city's coroner's office. Somebody had reported a dead body, found under bizarre circumstances. A doctor by the name of James Scanlon had been called out to a house in Stepney, east of Houndsditch, in the early hours of the morning. His testimony is as follows.
On the night of the 16th of December, at 3:30 a.m, a woman called through the speaking tube from the street to my bedroom. I dressed and found 2 young women at the door. One said, "There's a man very bad at 59 Grove Street." They didn't tell me what was the matter with him, and I didn't ask. There was a light upstairs at 59 Grove Street, but the house was locked up. We knocked repeatedly. When the front door was at last opened, I saw no one. There was no light in the passage. I lighted a match and followed the woman upstairs. The door of the upstairs front room was ajar, and it was dimly lit by a ceiling gas area. Before examining the man, I spoke to him in English and asked him his name. I wrote down his reply as George Gardstein. I asked what had happened to him, and he answered, 3 hours ago I was shot by a friend with a revolver in the back by mistake. I concluded that the stomach had been perforated. I suggested he should be taken to London Hospital, but they wouldn't entertain the idea. They gave no reason. I got back to the surgery at 4:30. I called again at 59 Grove Street at about 11:15 a.m. The door of the upstairs front room was closed, and the Holland blinds had been pulled down. The man was dead. On my return to the surgery, I called the coroner's office.
Scanlon's report of a dead man with a bullet to the stomach was immediately seized upon by investigators. They knew that one of the gang members involved in the Houndsditch shooting had been hit in an instance of friendly fire. Given that the doctor had been called out at 3:30 in the morning, mere hours after the incident, and that the place of discovery was so close by, it could not be a coincidence. Police arrived at 59 Grove Street within an hour of the tip-off, finding the deceased man, known as George Gardstein, lying on a bed in the front room on the first floor. The cadaver's pockets contained 30 pistol cartridges, along with a drill bit and the nozzle of a blowtorch. Close by, underneath his mattress, was a Dreiser M1907 pistol. A strange and very specific array of accessories indeed. The house in which he was found also contained the exact same upholstered chairs that had been found in number 11 on Exchange Building Street. If all of this wasn't enough to pin Gardstein to the scene of the shooting, a key was found on his person which corresponded to the lock on the front door of number 9. The police had just got their miracle. The rest of the property was littered with firearms, bullets, and knives, alongside letters in Russian and Latvian, as well as a, quote, quantity of printed materials related to anarchism. In one of the back rooms, detectives discovered a woman burning photographs and papers in the fireplace. It appeared she was trying to destroy evidence. She was taken into custody and brought to City Police headquarters for a statement, where she revealed her name as Rosa Trasionsky. Another woman by the name of Luba Milstein surrendered herself to the police at around the same time. But the biggest catch of the day was a man by the name of Nicholas Tokmakov, a recent Russian immigrant and a mandolin player in a balalaika band that played at a local anarchist club. He appeared at the house during the search, asking after someone called Fritz, and was taken into custody. As it happened, Tokmakov was well acquainted with the property's residents, and was able to provide an extensive list of names, including those that had been at the property on the night of the Houndsditch shooting.
On Friday, the 16th at 2 p.m., I went to 59 Grove Street. The door was opened by a little girl. I went upstairs and entered the back room, where I saw Peter the painter, Fritz, Yurka, Rosa, the man who is now dead, and 3 or 4 others who I do not know. The man who is now dead was talking to Fritz all the time I was there, which was about 20 minutes. While I was there, I played the mandolin for them. I have been into both rooms on the first floor at 59 Grove Street. Fritz had revolvers, one a Browning, which he always carried in his pistol pocket, the other a Mauser, which he kept at home. Peter did not carry a revolver. I have seen about 500 or 600 cartridges in the back room.
Owing to the wealth of information acquired through these witness testimonies, a far clearer picture began to emerge in front of investigators. The men and women lodging at number 59 Grove Street were part of or associated with an anarchist gang, some of whose members had been present at the Houndsditch shooting just a day earlier. Tokmakov's, along with Milstein's and Trasionsky's statements, led to the arrest of 3 more men associated with the gang: Jacob Peters, Yurka Dubov, and Osip Fedorov, all suspected of being accessories to murder. However, multiple people remained unaccounted for, chief among them a man by the name of Fritz Svars, the man renting 59 Grove Street. His name, along with some of the other remaining suspects, were plastered on wanted posters across London. With their descriptions circulating the vast city, it was only a matter of time before someone came forward. We are one step closer to Sidney Street. In the meantime, the London press was having a field day. Speculative and sensational reports of an anarchist gang crowded the city's newspapers, particularly following a police search of Gardstein's property on December 27th, where they found an arsenal of Mauser bullets, Russian anarchist and socialist literature, and instructions on how to build a bomb, along with the necessary materials to do so. The Daily Telegraph and Evening Standard, in melodramatic fashion, called the house on 44 Gold Street a bomb factory. The Standard also described the entire Houndsditch saga as a, quote, anarchist conspiracy. The city had been whipped up into an anarchist fever, with curious crowds being drawn to the site of the shooting. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened, though. In 1909, there had been a highly publicized incident where two gunmen of Latvian descent ambushed and robbed the wage van of a London rubber factory in broad daylight. The robbers then hijacked a tram and led police on a high-octane, average-speed chase through the streets of Tottenham, indiscriminately shooting up the place as they went. In the end, the perpetrators committed insurance fraud, but not before murdering 3 and injuring 19 more. The press published sensationalist articles that claimed, erroneously, that these individuals were anarchist, when evidence pointed to them being socialist, contributing to a burdensome association of anarchism with violence and criminality. Since then, animosity towards anarchism in London had risen sharply, and fears of a coordinated anarchist uprising had taken root. In reality, the movement in Great Britain never advanced beyond a fractured confederation of ideologically schismatic groups. As one might expect from anarchists, they never established any unified organization. By the 1890s, its popularity was on the decline, having been gradually eroded away by the rise of socialism. Most anarchists, as even the police noted in their investigation, were not a threat. The most prominent anarchist club in London, on Jubilee Street, running parallel to Sidney Street, was given, quote, a good name for orderliness and sobriety. Anarchists across the country disavowed the gang, and some even questioned whether they were truly anarchists, arguing that they were perhaps using the movement as cover for their nefarious doings. The spectre of anarchism, however, was too tempting a bogeyman for the press and society at large. The topic was popular and sensational, and thus very profitable for newspapers. The preconception that it was an ideology most frequently subscribed to by foreigners was also appealing to those that wanted to imply a correlation between immigrants' criminality and violence. Indeed, the fact that the Houndsditch shooting had been carried out by Eastern European anarchists seemed to confirm that association in the eyes of Londoners, with one man interviewed by a local newspaper saying, "It's very unusual for an English burglar to be armed with a revolver. It is not in English practice, but I dare say the example set by foreign criminals in this country has not been without its bad influence." But the scale of popular fears of an anarchist takeover were unfounded. While the press speculated that the Houndsditch gang was preparing to assassinate King George V at his coronation in the summer of 1911, their actual goals were far from revolutionary. London police were forced to release a statement in late December to clarify that the gang's operational scope was limited only to burglarious purposes, i.e., robberies and not sophisticated anti-state conspiracies, in order to quell the growing paranoia. Back on the ground, police were now getting word on the men they were looking for. Just east of Houndsditch, on Sidney Street, Fritz Svars, alongside another gang member, Josef Sokolov, were hiding out in a 4-story red brick townhouse. An anonymous informant had given them up to the authorities. The street was immediately placed under surveillance, but police didn't want to pull the trigger quite yet. The entire area was filled to the brim with civilians, and they knew from the Houndsditch shooting that these men were likely armed to the teeth. But according to their source, Svars and Sokolov intended to leave the property sometime the next day, so police needed to act decisively lest they slip through their fingers. So, under the cover of darkness at 2 a.m. on the 3rd of January, police began evacuating Sidney Street of its residents as silently as possible, to avoid waking the gang members. The occupants of 100 Sidney Street were also awoken and quietly extracted, including the woman sheltering the two suspects. She would later claim she was threatened into doing so. Shortly before 7:30, police finished their evacuation operation and deliberated on their next move. They had a bit of a problem. You see, the two gang members were located on the second floor of the property, and if police elected to storm the building, they would have to go up the narrow stairs in order to reach them. If the men were awake and ready, then they would surely gun down any officers that funneled themselves through this choke point. Frederick Wensley, the detective inspector on the scene, recalled it would have been simply insurance fraud for any stranger to go up, for the staircase could have been held against an army. So, they decided to besiege the house and flush the men out. In preparation, police riflemen took up positions across the street in number 109 here, their weapons trained on the doorway of number 100. At this stage, around 200 officers had been deployed, many of whom had been assigned to block the area off to the curious crowds of civilians who were being drawn to the scene. This number would rise to 500 officers as the day dragged on. At 7:30 a.m., police decided they would give the men a chance to come peacefully. They would inform them that they were surrounded and that it would be best for them to surrender. In order to do so, they first had to get their attention. With that in mind, Police Sergeant Leeson marched in front of the house and began pelting the second-floor windows of 100 Sidney Street with gravel stones. Each time pebble and glass met, an echo washed over the onlookers. Time was caught in a cobweb. After a few beats, just as it appeared the men were still asleep, a shot pierced the gossamer veil with a crack. Just moments after Leeson had let loose his stones, his message was answered in kind by a fusillade of bullets. The window shattered, a Mauser emerging from the jagged frame. He had been hit, and the siege of Sidney Street had begun. It was immediately clear that the police were outgunned. The assailants in number 100 were equipped with automatic pistols, while the police had to make do with antiquated, short-range revolvers, shotguns, and one-shot rifles. Just an hour into the shooting, police commanders decided they needed help and called on the British Army to render aid. Nearby, at the Tower of London, was a regiment known as the Scots Guards, but they could not be mobilised without the permission of the government. A hurried message was sent to the Minister of the Interior, Winston Churchill, who upon receiving it was having a bath. He authorised the deployment of these troops to Sidney Street without delay, and a detachment of 19 soldiers arrived at the scene shortly after 10 a.m. They then deployed to various positions around the building. One detachment occupied the top floor of a brewery here. Another moved to an apartment on the other side of the courtyard here. The rest of the men took up positions at each end of the street, lying prone and aiming at the second-floor window of the building. The combined police and military force now unleashed their own torrent of fire onto the gunmen, breaking every window and tearing through curtains. A reporter watching from the top of a nearby building described the pandemonium as follows.
My eyes were now fixed upon one building, and no other impression could find a place in my mind. The Anarchist's house had the horrible fascination of a house of death. Bullets were raining upon it. As I looked, I saw how they spat at the walls, how they ripped splinters from the door, how they made neat grooves as they burrowed into the red bricks or chipped off corners of them. The noise of battle was tremendous and almost continuous. The heavy barking reports of army rifles were followed by sharp and lighter cracks of pistol shots. From 11 o'clock until 12:30, there were not scores or hundreds of shots fired, but thousands. It seemed the assassins had an almost inexhaustible supply of ammunition. The idea that only 2 men were concealed within that arsenal seemed disproved by the extreme rapidity with which their shots came from one floor and another.
At this point, the besiegers still didn't have a clear line of sight of the gunmen. Every available position looked upon number 100 at an unfavorable angle. In an attempt to bait them into exposing themselves, the authorities dressed up mannequins of hay in police uniforms and poked their torsos out of cover, hoping the gunmen would be fooled into firing at them. This brought little success. After 3 hours of this back and forth, at around 1 p.m, smoke began to emerge from the building. It was later speculated that a gas pipe had been struck by one of the uncountable bullets fired at the building. Detective Inspector Wensley argued the besieged men had set it themselves to cover their escape. At any rate, the building was slowly consumed by the growing inferno. The gunmen's shots became more and more infrequent, until at around 2 p.m, the house fell completely silent. At this point, it was almost completely engulfed. Only then were firefighters permitted to approach the house and quench the fire. It was over. By the end of the affair, police had been reinforced by an additional detachment of field artillery as well as 3 heavy machine gun teams. They were not used, but the fact that they showed up in the first place was indicative of the severity of the situation. Miraculously, no officers had been killed during the gunfight, although a handful were wounded. The only deaths would be the 2 gunmen, Fritz Svars and Josef Sokolov, and an unfortunate firefighter who was crushed by the debris of the collapsing building. Sokolov's and Svars' bodies would later be found in the charred ruins. The prior had been killed by a gunshot wound to the head, and the latter suffocated due to excess smoke inhalation. So that was it, right? These guys had battled the police tooth and nail as to not be arrested, so they must have been the Houndsditch gunmen. Case solved? Well, maybe not. A letter sent by Svars on January 2nd, 1991 was intercepted by police shortly before the Sidney Street siege. In it, he professes to have not been involved in the police killings and that he had not been in Houndsditch on the 16th at all. He was also of the opinion that no one would believe his side of the story, which perhaps explains the last stand mentality witnessed on the day of the siege. While this letter by no means acquits Svars, it begs the question: who was there that night in Houndsditch? Who were the Phantom Gunmen? And who really killed the policemen? First of all, British authorities always assumed that George Gardstein, the man killed in a friendly fire incident, murdered all 3 police officers that fateful night in Houndsditch, which upon closer inspection would have been impossible. Prosecutors assumed that to be the case because all 3 victims were fatally wounded by the same pistol, the M1907 Dreiser. The weapon was discovered underneath the mattress that Gardstein was found dead on, and thus they assumed it to be his. But there are a few problems with that conclusion. Firstly, when Gardstein's property was searched late in December, they could not uncover a single Dreiser bullet, instead finding Mauser cartridges. Secondly, it's clear that he had not been wielding the pistol the night of the shooting. Gardstein had been engaged in a hand-to-hand struggle with Constable Choate, and it was this that caused him to be shot by a stray bullet that was intended for the policeman. This makes him the only person that could have fired the bullets that were later found in Choate's leg, because they were fired at close range. So close a range, in fact, that investigators found a burn mark on Choate's coat where a pistol had been pressed as it was discharged. But the bullets found in Choate's leg were Mauser, not Dreiser. The entry wound for the Dreiser bullet that killed Choate also indicated he was shot from behind. So unless Gardstein managed to swap pistols while being grappled by a man who was taller and stronger than him, then somehow make his way behind him to kill him, it's highly likely he didn't murder anyone that night. He was definitely one of the gunmen, but not the gunman. What this all means is that the police and the courts misidentified the murderer, one that may have walked free on account of their sloppiness. With that in mind, let's break down all the suspects, some of whom were uncovered long after the events in Houndsditch and Sidney Street took place. Those that we can pin to the initial December shooting will be placed in this top row here. Those that were not there will be placed in the bottom row. Those that are unknown will be placed in the middle. First is Peter the Painter, the man Nicholas Tokmakov, the Russian balalaika player interviewed by police in December, had referenced to be at 59 Grove Street in his initial statement. He was a suspect very early on in the process, but it quickly became apparent that he had not been involved in the jewelry store robbery and the resulting killings, having remained at Grove Street that night. He vanished almost immediately following the start of the police investigation and was never brought into custody. The second was Max Smoller, who turned out to be the Joe Levi that had purchased number 11 Exchange buildings back in November of 1910. Smoller also disappeared in the aftermath of the shooting, never to be arrested. He is a more important figure, as a March 1911 police report claims that he was the mastermind behind the robbery plot, and that he was almost certainly present for the killing of the 3 police officers. He was said to use a Browning pistol, and it's thought that he accidentally shot Gardstein, as a Browning bullet was found in him. Third is Nina Vasilyeva, the woman suspected of fleeing the scene with the gunman, described in the wanted poster released in December of 1910. She was arrested on the 7th of February 1911 while wearing the exact same coat witnesses had spotted her in, still caked in Gardstein's blood. Her lodging at number 11 Exchange buildings was also confirmed by a fingerprint match on those bottles that were found just after the shooting. Looks like this clue connected with something after all. Then we get to the suspects we already know. First, we start with Gardstein. We've already spoken about him, so we'll keep it short. His presence at Houndsditch is unquestionable. Now we have 3 people that we can pin to the scene of the crime with a high degree of certainty. But testimonies imply that 5 individuals had been present, which means we're missing 2 people. There are 4 remaining suspects: Jacob Peters, Ilka Dubov, Fritz Fars, and Yosef Sokolov. One witness, a shop owner by the name of Isaac Levy, testified that on the night of the 16th of December, he saw Peters and Dubov carrying the injured Gardstein away from the scene of the murders, at which point one of the men leveled a gun at him and told him, "Do not follow us." Other witnesses confirm seeing Peters and Dubov at the Exchange buildings in prior months. However, the police officers that survived the Houndsditch shooting were unable to confirm if they were the men that had fired upon them, or if they'd been there at all. Svars and Sokolov were simultaneously pinned to the scene, but this time by gang associates. Vasilyeva testified that they took part in the shooting alongside Smoller and Gardstein. Luba Milstein, Svars' romantic partner, testified the same, stating the pair carried Gardstein into the front room of 59 Grove Street. Finally, another gang acquaintance, Karl Hoffman, recalled that Svars and Sokolov visited his home on the night of the 16th and told him Gardstein had been shot by Smoller, and that Svars and Smoller had carried him to 59 Grove Street. So who's telling the truth? I personally find it doubtful that Sokolov had been present that night. He was known to have a pronounced limp and was thus more immobile. It's unlikely the gang would have selected him for a heist that might have required a quick getaway. Fritz Svars, on the other hand, is a more realistic proposition. Tokmakov stated Svars was known to use Browning and Mauser weapons, and bullets matching those guns were littered all over the crime scene. However, the historian Donald Rumbelow argues that the testimonies pinning him to the scene are suspicious. He claims Milstein did not initially identify who brought Gardstein into the front room of Grove Street in a December statement before changing her mind, naming Fritz and Sokolov in February and March statements. Having analysed the documentation, there's nothing there that would amount to perjury. It's possible, but not provable, that she lied about their involvement. He also cites Hoffman as an unreliable witness. Hoffman did initially claim that he didn't know any of the Houndsditch criminals before quickly reversing course in a March hearing. This change of tune seems to coincide with the deaths of Svars and Sokolov, meaning it's possible they coordinated their statements to incriminate the already dead gang members. Dead men can't complain, after all. This behaviour would align with the gang's background. They all hailed from Eastern European territories under Russian control. Tsarist security services subjected many of the gang's members, including Peters and Dubov, to torture for being involved in industrial strikes and Latvian separatist revolts. As a result, they would have viewed cooperation with the authorities with disdain, seeing the police as they had seen them in Russia, as merely a vehicle of state oppression. Further throwing doubt on the matter, Police Constable Strongman, the only person to give a detailed description of one of the gunmen that night, seemingly described Jacob Peters or even Jurka Dubov.
I saw a man aged about 30, height 5'6" or 7 inches, pale thin face, dark curly hair, dark moustache, dressed dark suit jacket, no hat, who pointed the revolver in the direction of Police Sergeant Tucker and myself, firing rapidly. We stepped back, Sergeant Tucker turned round and staggered.
Both Peters and Dubov had curly hair and dark moustaches, and matched the height description closely. Svars, in contrast, had blonde hair. Sokolov was 6 foot and had a darker complexion, and Smoller had a round face and was clean-shaven, excluding all of them. British courts interpreted Strongman's statement to be referring to Gardstein, but as already established, he could not have been the man firing at Tucker, as all of Tucker's wounds were inflicted by Dreiser bullets. Peters and Dubov did have alibis for the night of the 16th, but according to Rumbelow, they appeared rehearsed, and the court often skipped cross-examination, making it difficult to find discrepancies in their testimonies. As far as I can tell, police never searched the homes of Peters or Dubov, and therefore did not find any weaponry that may have tied them to the scene of the crime. All in all, it's not possible to pin any of the 4 potential Phantom Gunmen to the crime scene beyond a shadow of a doubt. Svars and Sokolov could have been there, but with the previous analysis in mind, I believe it's likely that either Jacob Peters or Jurka Dubov fatally wounded all 3 officers. The question remains open though, and it always will. Thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Check it out on PC, Xbox and PlayStation in the description or pinned comment below to get a bunch of bonuses including 100,000 Silver Lions, 7 days of premium and much more. It's available for new and returning players for a limited time only, so act fast. There's also a new mobile version of the game for those of you who are on the go, so don't forget to check that out too.